Funding for This Is Nashville comes from Burr and Foreman Law Firm, serving clients with transactional, litigation, and regulatory needs. Discovering how each client defines a win and working with them every step of the way to achieve it. Burr.com.
I'm Khalil Ekolona, and this is Nashville. For more than 45 years, Abby Rubenfeld has been practicing law with a focus on civil rights and family law. She advocates for LGBTQ plus community, and with her practice in Tennessee, she stays very, very busy. From helping to repeal laws banning sodomy and same-sex marriage, Abby has left her mark on providing for same-sex couples, trans people, and more. Now she joins us in studio to share her story, what the issues that the LGBTQ community are facing today, and the importance of remaining educated. With honor, I'd like to welcome Abby Rubenfeld to This Is Nashville. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.
Really appreciate it. So tell me this, what's on your mind right now as we are nearing the end of January in 2025?
The dire straits our country is in because of Donald Trump being put in office. That's very frightening to me. Whether our democracy will survive, I'm very cognizant of the fact that Hitler consolidated his power after he was elected chancellor in 55 days. And Trump seems to be following the playbook to try to consolidate. And that's very frightening to me. I mean, where are our Democratic leaders? Why aren't they speaking out? Why aren't they introducing legislation? Why aren't they holding press conferences? Where are they? Where is the loyal opposition? So, yeah, that's what's worrying me the most. Not just, the gay community is clearly a target, but immigrants, I feel so bad for them. Like, they're such a target, too. And just everybody who's not a straight white man, basically.
That is the truth. Do you feel dismayed that Democratic leaders and people have been quiet thus far?
Yes. I feel incredibly disappointed and betrayed in a certain way. They're supposed to be our leaders. Personally, I think Kamala Harris should speak out. She should be the head of the Democratic Party now. She was our last presidential candidate. She's very articulate. She does provide the opposite approach of Trump. I wish she would speak out. I wish somebody would speak out. It's like this deafening silence, it feels like, with all this Trump stuff just going one after the other.
What do you think this hesitancy to speak out is about?
I don't know. I guess it's about, politicians fearful that they're going to get primaried and lose the races, but they're Democrats. So I don't get it. The Republicans have demonstrated that they don't want to work with Democrats. They're not going to be reasonable. And it's great. I think Democrats should still try to be reasonable and should try to cooperate and work together. That's what government's supposed to be. Mm-hmm. But if the Republicans aren't going to cooperate, then they need to start resisting. Republicans in the minority put big holes in President Biden's agenda. They stopped a lot of stuff, and we have a bigger minority than they had. So why aren't we doing something?
He said something interesting, and it's something that is spoken about a lot in electoral politics. Politicians are worried about they're going to get primaried. So they're worried about their job security and their job safety, and not the reason why they said they wanted to take that position.
Absolutely. They forget about the people that elected them, that they promised they would represent and support and help. And that, especially in the Republican Party where Donald Trump's, I don't want to call them minions because I love minions and I feel like that insults minions, but Donald Trump's troops, he can say the word and they're going to primary any moderate. There's no more moderate Republicans. The Romneys and the McCains are gone. Gosh, I never thought I would miss the days of George W. Bush. I think my wife started antidepressants when he got elected. That's how bad we all thought about him, and now kind of miss him.
Yeah, I know a lot of people who wanted to move out of the country when George W. Bush was elected, and then a lot of people repeated that same claim this past election cycle.
Some people are moving out of the country, and I think a lot of gay and especially trans people are leaving red states like Tennessee to go to blue states where they can get care. Although now the Trump administration is trying to stop every hospital, even in blue state. I mean, so much for their states' rights and everything should be decided by the states. They want to impose their agenda on everyone.
What do you think that is? And I want to get to, we'll talk about your life and other things, but I want to stick with this for a second. What do you think that is with a lot of people in America who definitely recognize how they want to live their lives, but what they take this position of, they are going to impose their view of how other people should lead their lives. They're not simply minding their own business.
The Tim Walz, mind your own damn business. That was the best line of the election, of any election.
That's what I heard growing up as a kid. Mind your business.
Yeah, exactly. That's what we should be doing. Like, as long as your business isn't hurting somebody else, and being trans doesn't hurt anybody. I mean, this whole thing about trans kids, these are decisions made by parents in conjunction with medical providers, and they're not easy decisions. Plus, the way the Trump people go, it's all falsehoods. It's not like all these hospitals are cutting on kids. They're giving them hormone blockers or basic stuff to just maintain so that they won't develop as the gender they're not. That's all reversible. We're not talking about surgery. It's just, I don't know why people go along with that. I think people like to have a scapegoat. People like to think that I'm better than someone else. And the Trump people are really good at, zoning in on that. Like, the fact that black men and Hispanic men in higher numbers than before supported Trump just blows me away. I saw a picture on Instagram like yesterday that showed the INS agents, ICE agents leading off a guy in handcuffs, and he was wearing a Latinos for Trump shirt.
Yeah, I saw that same photo.
It's very powerful.
I understand why you would be kind of surprised about black men and Latino men voting for Trump in greater numbers than they did in 2020. I'm not.
Why is that?
From the conversations I've had with friends, because some people look at, again, talking about the imposition of our ideals and values on others. Some people feel that some of the ideals and values from the LGBTQ community and some what we would call progressive are being imposed upon them. And to look at it as this person, I try to be practical. What is really going to do the most good for the most people? And then we continue to grow from there to where everybody can have good happen to them. I'm not Pollyannish to think that it's going to happen in my lifetime, but I think that is a worthy path for us to follow. So being in between of all of this and hearing these perspectives from people on the right and the left who are close friends and some family members, I think that folks are trying to figure out how they can lead their lives with the least amount of disruption to it. Not necessarily in systems of government, but also systems of social systems of how people are to live. I've had a lot of people say to me they have no problem with they support trans rights, but do trans rights need to be introduced to their kids in school before they talk to their kids about gender and sexuality?
I have a lot of reactions to that.
This is what I've heard.
And I can see that, and I think some mistakes were made in our movement in pushing things that are right to do, but pushing them too hard, too fast, and without enough education. Like, when you're doing something people don't understand, you can't just do it. Like, you have to build up to it and educate people. Like the whole thing with Brown versus Board of Education, where they had that strategy of, step by step, and they educated people, and they educated the Supreme Court in the briefs that they filed. And I think we didn't do so well with that with our community. And the way I look at an election, maybe it's jaded, but, I voted in a lot of elections where you voted for the lesser of two evils.
Yeah.
You know, and we have a system that's binary. There's only two choices. And if you thought, like, I have a lot of people, even relatives, that didn't vote for Harris because they were mad at Biden about the Palestinian situation, which is abhorrent. Like, for Biden, of all people, to have done that policy just amazes me, because it just seems so out of character with him. And, like, is Trump going to make it better for the Palestinians? Is Trump going to make it any better, the lives of black men or, Hispanic men? No. Like, if you're, like, to me, I had to bite the bullet and vote for Kamala, because otherwise you ended up with what we have now, which is frightening, and our democracy is going down the tubes. Like, Congress is meaningless right now. Trump is doing all this stuff by executive orders that's clearly unconstitutional, but nobody in Congress is even saying anything.
I'm going to step up and challenge.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so I want to talk a little bit about your early life. What life was like growing up. Where were you born?
I was born in upstate New York, in Oneonta, New York, and we moved to Florida when I was 7.
What part of Florida?
Sarasota on the West Coast.
That's a nice part of Florida.
Yeah. When we moved to Sarasota in 1961, Sarasota County was the only Republican county in Florida. Isn't that crazy? Nowadays, there's no Democratic counties.
That's something. Tell me about your dad. What was he like?
My dad was an adventure seeker and a pilot. And he, it's amazing to me he ever settled down and got married, frankly. He fought for the RAF, the Royal Air Force, before the United States got in World War II. And then he fought for America. And then at the end of the war, the Israeli underground, the Palmach, that came over here secretly, and they got lists, which I'm sure were pieces of paper, it was way before the internet, of all the pilots discharged from the Army Air Force, and then called all the people with Jewish names. Isn't that crazy and old-fashioned? To see if they would come over and help Israel. So my dad was one of 5 Americans and South Africans that helped start the Israeli Air Force, and they stole planes from here. He had fake passports. It was all this intrigue stuff they had, and he never wanted to write a book about it because he was afraid of Arab terrorists. But back in the days when Arab terrorists just hijacked planes before they beheaded people and all the other stuff they do now. But he didn't want to write a book because of that. But he's in books like that Eitzer Weitzman, who used to be the president of Israel, wrote. Eitzer Weitzman was my dad's co-pilot. My dad said my dad shot down the first plane for Israel, but they had to give credit to Eitzer Weitzman because he was a Sabra. He was born in Israel.
Well, it sounds like a movie, your dad's life a little bit.
He is in a movie. There is a movie, I forget what it's called, like Beyond something, and it's about these guys that help start the Israeli Air Force, and it's produced by Steven Spielberg's sister.
So you say he was an adventure seeker?
Yeah.
Did that influence you? Like, did he influence in you to pursue what your passions were in life?
Yeah, in some ways, because we grew up, we moved to Florida, like I said, in 61, sort of at the heyday of the civil rights movement. And, we were good liberal white people, and we had this discussion that we weren't going to stop at places that segregated and, those kinds of things. So my parents were socially conscious that way. And plus I'm Jewish. We used to get sent out of the class when the kids prayed, which was unconstitutional and had been declared unconstitutional many years before, but they still prayed to Jesus and they sent us out. So I was used to those kinds of things, and my dad stood up to that. He overheard somebody once at a table near us being anti-Semitic, and my dad was little. I mean, you saw me, I'm not very big. My dad was I think he lied and said he was 5'8". I don't think he was really 5'8".
Okay.
He was a little guy, but he was tough. And he heard this guy being anti-Semitic, went over and picked the guy up and moved him and just gave him a talking to. My dad was not afraid of anyone. So I guess I got that from him.
You got that fearlessness in him. So as you're growing up in, 1960s Florida with parents who are socially aware, your dad is an adventure seeker and someone full of drive and passion. How did your ideas about equality and equanimity in our country regarding social issues, how did they develop as you were growing?
I think part of it was the civil rights movement, because I went to segregated schools until 1968. I always say that they must have sent the Brown decision by Pony Express or something, because it took so many years to get there. Then when I was in 9th grade, they let just a few brave black kids that volunteered to come to our schools. So there'd be one black kid and, hundreds of white kids. And then the next year, they just closed down the black schools and sent them to our schools, starting in high school, which was backwards to me because these poor kids kids in my classes hadn't learned to read. I let kids cheat off of me but I became really aware of the unfairness. And the black part of town, which it was very segregated, didn't have paved streets. And we're talking the 60s. I mean, that wasn't that long ago.
No.
So I was really aware of that. And the language people use, when they closed down the black schools and the kids came to our school, the football coaches knew, like, this is the future and this is going to help us to have more guys. It can only help. Cheerleaders and stuff didn't do that. The girls that had been like captain of cheerleaders, this or that, they were just out. But the black guys that were playing football organized and told the coaches, we won't play unless the girls get to be cheerleaders. So they made them do it, which I thought, again, that shows like the power of organizing, That was when I was in high school, so...
Did you get involved with movements then?
Yeah, like I got involved in like anti-war stuff, going to Washington for protests, but I was still young. I had to get permission from my parents.
Yes. Now, you identify as lesbian.
I do.
When did you realize you were gay? When you were in school?
Yes, but I did. When I went off to college, my best friend from high school had come out. So every time I came home, I'd go to gay bars with her, but I wouldn't really deal with myself. And my best friend in college was having the exact same thing happen. Her best friend from high school had come out. So, but we were both kind of resisting. And I went to Princeton when I was first co-ed, so there weren't a lot of girls. And we would rock around in our gym shorts and our high-top sneakers, and then these guys would call us dykes, and we'd be like, all upset, we should have listened to them. They were saying what we didn't see. So I had a lot of trouble accepting that. Like this is kind of stupid now, but I wanted to go into politics, and we're talking about, the very early 70s. I graduated high school in 1971 and started Princeton the fall of 71, and you couldn't really go in politics if you were gay. Mm-hmm. And after a certain point, I was just so miserable that I had to come out and deal with it. And also, I can say this now because my brother's movie has, my brother was Paul Rubens, who did Pee Wee Herman. And there's a documentary about his life that was just premiered at Sundance, and he comes out in it. So, but he was not out during his career. I think most people thought he was gay, but he didn't think people thought that. Mm. But so I could never really talk about that. But my freshman year of college, he wrote me a letter, which I still have somewhere, coming out to me and saying, I'm still the same person that I was before you read that. Of course, when you get that, like for me, that was all I could focus on. Yeah. And I had a little mini breakdown about it, but it was because it made me deal with myself. And then eventually I did, and it was like kind of a relief. And then I realized, I don't want to go into politics anyways. What if I'm elected? I have to serve with all those jerks.
You decided not to.
Yeah.
So after you go to law school in Boston, right?
Yes.
And up there you got involved with a lesbian group that was involved in law. Tell me about that.
Boston had like 6 law schools, I think. And so we had a lesbians in law group, and once a month we all had dinner, which was a really good support system, because we were all kind of different at our schools, so that was good. I started a gay group at my law school. It was kind of funny. The day we went to meet with the dean to get permission, I used to play rugby, and I had broken my nose, so it was split open, and both my eyes were black. I mean, I looked pretty tough. He probably gave us permission because he was afraid of me.
Hey, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree,
That's right?
Now, did your work in like meeting with these groups while you were in law school, did that kind of inspire and influence your decision to go into this type of civil rights and family law that your career became?
Yes, but also when I got out of law school and I started looking for jobs here, because I had found a summer job here working at legal services in the days when legal services was really big during the Carter administration. So I was looking for jobs here, and I got a job with Rose Palermo and Denny Cheatham, and it was just by luck. Like, Rose had just had her second child, and they needed help. Mm-hmm. So it was good timing. And Rose's practice is like the practice I have now. Like, she did family law, and then she did civil rights cases. We did a lot of cases against TSU. TSU would, like, I'm sure it's not still the same, but back then in the early 80s, they would discriminate against anyone who is not African American. So like African blacks, Asian Indians, and like really stupid things they would do that were so obvious. But so I started doing discrimination cases with Rose, and then I got the chance to go to Lambda and then came back. I never wanted to stay in New York. I don't really like big cities like that.
We're going to take a break. We're speaking with renowned Nashville-based civil rights attorney Abby Rubenfeld, who's blazed a trail for LGBTQ plus advocacy nationwide. When we come back, we're going to shift gears and take a closer look at the issues facing marginalized groups here in Tennessee. Stay with us. This is Nashville.
Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP, and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Khalil Ekalona, and this is Nashville. Welcome back to the show. For the whole hour, we're going to be talking with Abby Rubenfeld, a civil rights attorney and advocate for the LGBTQ plus community here in Tennessee. We were talking about her personal and professional journey up until now. We're going to switch focus and take a little bit of a closer look on what's on the horizon legislation-wise for Tennesseans. But first, I do want to say something that you mentioned. While you were working here in town, you worked in cases that kind of brought up some of the illegal practices that TSU was involved in, the discrimination cases, which makes me think sometimes people are of the belief that a population who is marginalized, who is oppressed, cannot be oppressors or marginalize themselves. But we're understanding that that's not true. How did involving yourself in those cases kind of broaden your understanding of, one, what equality truly is, and how marginalization affects us as humans?
Well, it made me realize that we can't generalize. Like, people are people, and, you know, that happens sometimes. That, and in fact, it happens a lot that, like, we're kind of taught everybody wants to be on top. And I think Republicans and right-wing people really push that narrative to pit people against each other, to make, like, poor white people think they're better than poor people of color, when they're all really the same in terms of what the government does or doesn't do for them, that kind of thing. And, you know, TSU, like, no excuse for that. But as a Jew, I think, like, no excuse for Jews oppressing Palestinians. Like, I think minority groups, marginalized groups should be way more cognizant of that. Of all people, like, we should be aware of that. But it doesn't work that way.
Do you think that some of the blinders are because people have been under such pain? Because I remember growing up and just having conversations with friends who firmly believed that African Americans, black people, could not be racist because we're the subject of so much racism. And to me, that just seemed ridiculous. It's like you're excusing yourself for being human because of what you've gone through.
I completely agree. I mean, everybody can have an ism, you know. Like, I think we all just need to look at ourselves and what we're doing and be open about it.
And look, my thoughts are, if you were born and raised in this country, you have some isms to work through.
Exactly.
Now, in recent years, the state legislature has proposed a fair share of bills that would seemingly target more marginalized people. They've censored books in school libraries featuring LGBTQ plus characters. They've prohibited minor access to gender-affirming care, and they've cracked down on drag, and local governments have cracked down on annual pride parades. Before we get into this next section, I do want to listen to an exchange in early 2023 between yourself and Republican State Representative William Lamberth.
Yeah, he didn't like me very much.
You said you're an attorney, correct?
Yes, sir. Do you want to see my bar card?
No, it's not necessary. But I found it interesting. You said you don't know the definition of prurient. So are you familiar with the Miller test?
I'm sorry?
Are you familiar with the Miller test?
No, I don't do that kind of criminal law. But if it's a test where a judge gets to interpret certain words, then it's not necessarily clear to people. Do you want to read the test?
Well, I'm kind of curious why you're not familiar with the actual U.S. Supreme Court decision that deals with the three-pronged test of determining what is obscene. How about Roth v. United States? Familiar with that one?
I didn't know that you wanted a legal brief. I'd be happy to give you one about this statute, sir.
It's some of the most basic legal principles on the planet when dealing with purity
kind of
interest.
I don't represent people charged with those things.
Let me try this one. Where'd you go to law school?
I'm sorry?
Where did you attend law school?
I went to law school at Boston University. I graduated in 1979, perhaps before you were born.
I'm not real sure why a basic question on the type of thing when you're standing here as I'm assuming what you're trying to portray yourself as a legal expert. I'm trying to get into some relatively basic aspects of this, and you've chosen to be insulting. So at this juncture,
I find you to be insulting to me.
Okay. I wasn't trying to be. I was literally.
You are.
Okay, so that tells me everything about your testimony, and it will literally be discarded. Thank you.
I have everything I need to know about your testimony, too, sir.
All right,
I understand your position.
We're back in session.
Okay. I get a few things from that. One, you're tough to deal with in court, huh? I imagine.
I don't take shit, like I respond. Mm-hmm. And that actually, the time before that I testified, and I testify about things just about the legal stuff that I know. It wasn't about criminal law I was supposed to testify, but the last time I testified, one of our elected officials turned his chair around so his back was to me the whole time I was speaking, like a child.
What is that? I mean, because for context, I believe that what we just heard was about determining whether a judge could rule if a drag performances are obscene. But I want to understand what your relationship is like with certain state lawmakers. But this level of decorum that has seemed to deteriorate, and not just during the past few years and administrations, this has been going on for about at least a solid generation in American political discourse. What's going on with that?
I don't really know. And I go into things like that, giving my testimony, trying to be respectful and trying to say things in a way that's not offensive to them, to try to argue things in their terms or to present it so they can understand. And I don't remember I had a whole written comment that I made about whatever the bill was. But when people react like that, it pushes all my buttons and I just can't control myself. I have to respond. He's lucky I didn't deck him.
We're glad that didn't happen. That would have made national news
yes,
for sure.
I'd still be in jail.
So you've been on the scene for a while and you know these state lawmakers. What's your relationship like with some of them?
Well, that day, a couple of them came up to me and gave me their cards, some guys from Memphis, and thanked me for my testimony and asked if they could help with anything. But the Democrats in our legislature are completely impotent. Like, there's a supermajority of Republicans that can do whatever they want. Like these new rules that don't let people speak out, don't let legislators speak out, or passing laws that make it a felony for elected officials to decide that Nashville will be a sanctuary city. That's ridiculous and unconstitutional.
Given that hostility that's around, how do you feel when you walk into the Capitol building? Defensive. Yeah.
I don't go there except if I'm asked to come testify. I'm afraid I'd get in trouble.
I'm sure, I imagine you didn't always feel that way walking into the Capitol building.
No, it's the people's house. We're all supposed to be welcome there. And as you said, they're elected by us, for us. They're supposed to be there to help us, but it doesn't seem like right now the majority cares at all about us.
What does this say about the folks who vote? And I don't care about Democrat and Republican or independent.
I agree. I do not get that. And I always think too, we have a lot of gay men are supposed to be so creative. Why can't the gay men that are Democrats, why can't they come up with better, advertising for us? We need better campaigns. But the Republicans are so good at, like buzzwords and like pushing these narratives to make people feel superior to other people when we should all be trying to be together.
Mm-hmm. Interesting to me. This idea of superiority to others is thrown out the window whenever there's a disaster.
Well, used to be. I mean, not now. Like, Trump isn't going to give aid to California. Like, he's only going to give aid to red states. Like, that's crazy. Like, disasters are disasters.
But, I mean, in the government apparatus, I understand what you're saying. But when it comes to the people, folks will come out and help their neighbors. They may have their opinions about their neighbors. But from what I've found, for the most part, people will come out. I'm just listening to the stories about how people responded to the 2020 tornadoes, how they responded to the floods that have happened out here. And I know stories of, folks living in other states where they came together to help each other out. So we have this attitude with each other as human beings when there's a natural disaster or there's an emergency, but that completely switches over when it comes to politics and policy.
I don't understand it. I mean, I'm Jewish, but I always thought Christianity was supposed to be about helping other people and loving your neighbor. I mean, that's what I always thought Jesus was about. Doesn't seem like it these days from the people that claim to be Christians.
Do you think we all need to practice what we preach a lot more?
Yes. Although some people are preaching the stuff they're doing. I mean, I think another one of the frightening things of the Trump administration is that they're legitimizing all this outrageous behavior and people think it's okay. I mean, some people.
You're someone who has advocated for the powerless, and you continue to. You've made not just a career, you've built your life on it. And there's others out there doing the same thing, particularly, at least what it looks like from social media. A lot of young people want to take that path. You've seen a lot. I'm sure they maybe reach out to you to talk to you. What guidance do you have for young folks now as we traverse these very trepidatious waters that we're in?
Well, I tell people that we do need to work together to fight and resist, that we need, we shouldn't give up. We've been through some of these situations and these kinds of attacks before, and we're still around. So I think we'll survive it. It's not going to be pleasant. And I try to encourage young people to, reach out to their elders, people like me, the older folks, to help them. But to, you're not going to be rich. Like, I'm not a rich lawyer, but I can afford my Titans tickets, and I'm not poor, so I can't really complain. But like after Trump was elected, and I started getting a million calls, like hundreds of calls from gay people that wanted to do advanced directives or do adoptions for their kids, and I reduced my rates to try to help more people. Like, I always tell people, this is what I charge, but if you can't afford it, talk to me and I'll work something out, because it's important to me to protect LGBT families.
Mm-hmm. If you're just tuning in, this is Nashville, and I'm your host, Khalil Ekolona. My guest is longtime civil rights attorney Abby Rubenfeld. We've been talking about her life, her work, and how she views society at the present moment. Part of your work was repealing laws that made same-sex marriage and sodomy illegal here in Tennessee. What was going on in that time in your life, professionally, and what was happening out here in the state when you were doing that work?
Well, when I was at Lambda, I was a legal director at Lambda Legal Defense in the early 80s. We tried to tackle sodomy laws nationwide, but we lost 5-4 in the Supreme Court in the Hardwick decision. And so when I came back here, people in various states were trying to change the law through state constitutions. And I'm pretty competitive, and I think Kentucky did a case and overturned theirs. And I was like, Kentucky, if they did it, then we need to do it. So then I set about trying, to set up a case. And I had some other people helping me, but when push came to shove, it was just me at 2 a.m. writing affidavits. So at that point, Tennessee originally had a sodomy law that made any kind of sex other than missionary position, married, heterosexual sex, a major felony. You get 15 years in prison for that. when I was in law school, getting ready to come here, my last year of law school, I got a letter. I don't know how this woman found me, and her name was Fag, Charlotte Fag. It's kind of funny. But she was in prison doing time for consensual sodomy.
Wow.
And wanted me to represent her at her parole hearing, which I did. And I can't remember if she got parole or not, but it was so weird being at her hearing and thinking, I do the same thing and you're in prison for it. But so we had this major felony. Then they did the criminal code revision here and they made it a minor misdemeanor, but they made it only gay specific. It's called homosexual acts, which made it easier to challenge. So then I challenged it here and we overturned it.
After a lot of hard work.
Yeah. That you don't get paid for.
You don't get paid for. How did the public react?
Well, mostly I got a lot of congratulations, but my office at the time had windows on two sides, and if I worked after dark, I would close all the shades so nobody could see me because I was all worried about people trying to shoot me. Yeah. So, I mean, I got a lot of compliments, but I don't know. I mean, there was a woman that, I forget her name, but she wanted to intervene, and she did some article about, she made these aprons that had two pockets, one for your Bible and one for your gun. Wow. And she came to court on it. At one point, she came to argue. My mom came up from Florida to watch me argue the case, and my mom was standing between her and me, so she couldn't do anything to me. It's kind of funny.
Mom protecting you.
Yeah, really.
To do this work, you kind of put a target on your back.
Yeah. And sometimes I was afraid. One time we got a present. I have two daughters. I think it was for my first daughter. We got this box, and we didn't know who it was from. And we tried to look up the company that was the return address and couldn't find it. By then, it was internet. And, or maybe it wasn't, but we couldn't find the company. So I called the police. Like, they have some unit that helps people that are out there, like me. And they sent the bomb squad to check, and it turned out it was from my kid. My kids have a dad, a gay friend of mine, and it was from his family, and it was a UNICEF plate. But I didn't know. It was an unidentified box, and I was afraid it was a bomb, and the police thought that too. Like, they were fine. They suggested sending the bomb squad, so that's kind of scary.
Yeah, that's very scary. You're constantly thinking about this, but it didn't deter you, obviously, from continuing this work.
No. And I'm not going to be deterred now by all the Trump stuff. I think that's one of the ways that they gain control. And one of the things is not to comply ahead. Don't give in. And I'm not going to do that. I'm going to keep fighting them.
We're going to take one last break and continue our conversation with Abby Rubenfeld, trailblazer for LGBTQ individuals in Tennessee and elsewhere. After the break, when we come back, we're going to finish up by affirming the need for optimism and hope in a time when it's needed most. And we're going to learn more about that fighting spirit she has. Stay with us. This is Nashville. Colonna, and this is Nashville. Welcome back to the show. Our time with family law and civil rights attorney Abby Rubenfeld is about to come to a close, unfortunately. But before we wrap up, I want to talk about positivity. It's not really looking good for drag performers, trans people, or anyone who identifies as LGBTQ, and a lot of other folks who identify differently outside of their sexual orientation or gender. But in reality, this is not a new phenomenon, as we've discussed before. I want to talk about ways how we can keep this momentum moving forward and not backwards,
Well, I think one thing that's really important is that people don't have to comply with all this stuff ahead of time. Like, you don't have, these executive orders that are coming down nationally, they aren't laws. They're just something Donald Trump wants. So until they're a law, a lot of them don't really mean anything. And I think people need to just continue doing what they're doing. They're not hurting anybody. They're not doing anything wrong. And let us challenge these things. We still have courts. I've lost some faith in the Supreme Court, but we got to believe that when push comes to shove, they're going to do the right thing on these really basic civil rights issues. I have to believe that, or I couldn't do the kind of work I've done for 46 years.
And that's that's a core tenet of belief for a lot of people who are in these spaces. But I ask to that, because in post conversations, election conversations with family and friends, I have people who have voted on all sides of the issues, on all sides of for either party. And there were some who were thinking that the social issues weren't their top priority because they're like, how could I think about this marginalized group when I've got to decide between paying bills or paying rent or paying health insurance or eating, And what that led me to think of is, okay, how can we find the humanity in people? How can we see the humanity, particularly in those who have views different from us, who have views who are potentially violently different from ours?
I think part of the responsibility part of the issue is that we each need to be responsible to be educated voters. I think part of the problem this election was what the talking heads on TV called the low information voters, because
that's
a lot of that stuff isn't true. I mean, that prices are going down under Biden. Gas prices were going down. Like, interest rates were going down. Inflation was going down. Like, that's what I'm saying. Like, I joke about having gay men come up with messaging ideas, but we do need to do better messaging because all of that was not true. And I agree. A lot of people voted on that. Like, I feel like I have to, the price of eggs should come down. But again, it's a two-party system. You gotta be educated, and you gotta look at what really you're voting for.
How can we better educate ourselves when we have legacy media institutions that have either led us astray or let us down?
I think that's a good point. But this election, they did start reaching out to other media outlets, and I think the Trump campaign did good at that with, the Joe Rogans and that whole crowd of people. And I think Kamala's campaign did better at that, certainly than Democrats before her, but maybe not enough. Like, we have to have new and different media approaches to reach people. Like Kamala's whole social media team was, I heard they were all under 25, the people on her social media team.
That's why it works so well.
Exactly.
They know what they're doing. They
Exactly.
They grew up on that. When you talked about Joe Rogan, a lot of people, I saw on media, and a lot of people who would say aren't necessarily millennials, older millennials, a lot of folks scoffed at that, as if Joe Rogan was unrefined, and the information and the conversations he has are potentially dangerous. But you just said that was a good move by the Trump campaign because a lot of people do listen to Joe Rogan.
I think that's true. I never heard of him until this campaign, but, we're all in our silos that I listen to my left-wing stuff and I never listened to those kind of things. But I think they mobilized a lot of voters by reaching out to that crowd, the crowd of people that listens to him and other ones. I'm sure there were others. I don't really know. But like Kamala going on that Call Me Daddy or whatever that was. I never heard of that either, but seems like it reached a lot of young people.
Mm-hmm. And so how can people get involved yet have these left of center, right of center, out of the norm conversations about getting involved that would inspire them? How can we educate ourselves? How can we get involved, educate ourselves, but also have the type of conversations that are different from this binary construct of red and blue?
Well, more people have to get involved in the political parties that we do have, or start a new one or new ones and work on those. But to me, the Democratic Party is ripe for taking over and modernizing and getting them on track about these issues, because clearly they haven't handled it well. That we, the last 3 elections have all been so close when the differences, maybe I'm just a Pollyanna. Maybe most people in this country do want, I saw that 45% of people approve of what Trump's doing, which is frightening. It's down from 47% what I saw today, but still 45% of people in this country think it's okay to go, pick up children at school and deport them without their parents.
Yeah.
Or think that it's okay to pull the security clearance. I don't like that what's his name, the guy with that big mustache. I don't like some of those former Trump people, but they've had credible threats against their lives by Iran and other countries. Like, how can you live with yourself? How can you sleep at night if you're going to pull their security detail?
You're referring to former National Security Advisor John Bolton.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that tends to get back into this vendetta. You've done this to me, so I will do this to you.
That's the Trump way
approach.
for sure.
Yeah, and also a little bit of the American way as well.
I think we got to get away from that.
So what can we do? Are you hopeful about anything that we're doing right now that maybe helps us get away from that position?
Well, I'm hopeful that losing that election is going to get Democrats to look at things and try to change how they approach stuff and not continue with all these old white men running things. Like, they need younger people. They need, diversity. And I know that's a bad word nowadays, but that's such garbage. Like, we need diversity in this country. We need different viewpoints. And I think young people, they're our future. Like, I'm not going to live to see what happens with all this, but they will. My daughters, like, they're childbearing age. Like, thank God they both live in blue states where if they get pregnant, they can get the medical care they need, but I think we all have to band together and we have to get more young people involved to try to change the values. And people need to speak out who are elected officials now. Like, I think AOC does. There's a couple of them, but not enough.
Is there a new standard that people should be having when it comes to electing, voting for people who are running for office?
We're still in sometimes the lesser of two evils. A lot of the time, especially living in Tennessee, I think there's a lot of cases where it's just the lesser of two evils. I think our goal should be to have for me, I was very happy with Kamala Harris. I had no trouble being for her. I was against Trump, but I was for her. I was for Obama. I was for Biden. There are people that I like, but I think we need to work on candidates that excite people, that speak out and I'm not sure now in the national scene who that would be, but some of the younger people, like, the Bidens and the older guys, they've done their part. It's up to us now, and people way younger than me.
You mentioned your daughters, and if they have grandchildren, you want them to be well. What do you want this country to be like for your grandkids when they're born? When they become grown? I
want this country to live up to the promise that was stated in the Declaration of Independence and our Constitution. I think our Constitution is a beautiful document. It sets up the best form of government there could possibly be, but it's an example. We've never lived up to it. The whole thing with 3/5 of a person and we haven't met it, but the goal, the model that it sets up, I think is really good if we can just put it into practice. And that's what I hope for my daughters, that they live in a true democracy, that where everybody's voice is heard, good people are elected to office, and the elected people do stuff to help the citizens of this country, not try to hurt them, like doing an executive order that takes away $35 insulin for people. Why? Why do you want to hurt people? I just don't get that. So I hope my daughters don't have to live through stuff like that.
One last question for you. You think you're ever going to retire?
No, I don't. I think I would drive my wife crazy if I was home all the time. But also, I don't really have a lot of, hobbies.
Okay.
I like the Titans, but...
That's tough these days.
Really tough.
Yeah.
But, I'm used to kind of losing, so it's okay. But, that's only part of the year. So, no, I've cut back on how much I work. I had a bad car accident that was totally my own fault, and I broke 12 ribs, and it's hard to sleep when you have one broken rib, much less 12. So I had a recliner. And so I finally learned that I'm 71. I own my own business. If I want to work at home in the morning in my recliner, I can.
That's right.
So I do that.
Really appreciate you being here.
Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Wonderful talking with you.
Yeah, it was fun.
Abby Rubenfeld is an attorney and LGBTQ plus advocate. She has worked in this state for a long time, helping a lot of people. Really appreciate you being here again.
Thank you.
Thanks to you for tuning in this hour. This is Nashville is a production of Nashville Public Radio. Today's episode was produced by Josh Deepan. It was directed by Tasha A.F. Lemley. Our technical director and board operator is Liv Lombardi. The masterminds behind our theme music are Larange and Namir Blade. You can listen back at thisisnashville.org or wherever you get good podcasts. And the conversation doesn't end here. Comment and tell us what you want to hear on the show by leaving us a message. 615-751-2500. You can find us on Blue Sky, Instagram, and Twitter at This Is Nashville. This is Nashville. I'm Khalil A. Colonna. We'll see you tomorrow, everybody. And be good to each other.